All right. Thanks, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. I know some people are still eating. Some people are going to trickle in, which is great. None of this is like very important at the outset. All the fun content is going to come later. That's a joke. So we're going over some of the program principles. We want to reiterate the overall scope of the program and then talk a little bit about the governance mechanisms. And then we'll touch on what some of the other talks are going to be. So I'm going to hand it off to my other half, better half. Yeah, better half. Deep to go over some of the program principles.
Right. I don't know about other, better, worse. Certainly not better dressed, though. So, shout out to Galen, always carrying me in my dead weight. Yeah, so we'd love to get started. I know there's some people that are peeking in. You can come in and bring your food. And so, yeah, let's start talking a little bit about the overall scope, principles, program design, just to set the stage for the rest of the session. I'm looking forward to a very productive conversation. And so just going to do as much as we can for context setting here to just ensure that we're on the same page about a few things. The first thing I'm going to call out is where did the Filecoin Plus program come from? It came from FIP 0003. I usually say 003. I've realized I need to add another 0 to that. The mechanisms and operations that were outlined in that FIP actually still sort of drive a lot of the work that we do today. We often use this screenshot, and there's a couple others that we use that actually are directly out of the original FIP that was written at this point almost 3 years ago. So it's pretty cool to see something that's like existed for so long over the history of Filecoin as a sort of shipped network and its mainnet capacity. And even though we've been able to evolve the system a fair bit within the bounds of what was described in the FIP itself hasn't yet had a significant evolution or rewrite. And so part of what we'd like to talk about today is also see how we continue to extend what we know from the FIP or how we want to modify and take next steps in terms of improving what the ability is for us to iterate and have impact on Filecoin's journey to be a useful network. Part of the FIP outlined the operating principles of the program as well. I'm not going to read through all of them, but there's a couple that I do want to call out. The first is transparency and accountability. A lot of the Filecoin network, as you know it today, is anonymous P2P network where entities show up and make decisions. Some of those decisions show up as transactions on chain or messages on chain, and some of those decisions don't. A great example is when a deal is proposed between two entities. You don't actually know that that's happened unless the proposal was accepted and a whole bunch of stuff went right on the supply side of that equation, resulting in a message being posted to the chain. Another good example is data being retrieved from the network, which isn't currently logged as a transaction on the network. So if I store my data with somebody in here, and then I want to get my data back, nobody knows that I've actually done that, and nobody knows whether I decide to come in and say I did it or did not do it. And Phil Plus aims to maximize the likelihood that Filecoin in some capacity actually ends up being a useful thing to society. And so it's important for us to conduct ourselves and design systems that are easily held transparently held accountable transparently, so that we can continue to design them in a scalable way that is buildable upon, but also trustlessly dependable. The other thing that I want to call out here is this limited trust earned over time concept. Phil Plus was born out of the idea that it's actually just difficult to programmatically or algorithmically identify whether or not an entity in a completely P2P network is trustworthy. So all of you in this room, I've seen your faces, we've hung out, I trust you. I couldn't have done that if you were just F01236 on the Filecoin network and we'd never interact and I had no idea who you were. And so Phil Plus sort of introduces the ability for entities to earn reputation and trust over time. And this idea that we should expect that trust can be established, but isn't default established or needs to be earned is something that I'd like for you guys to continue to maintain as you hear some of the conversations, especially from RG, Simon, and others, as they present the topics that they go through today. Overall, things to call out, Filecoin Plus is designed for all client actors with quality data who engage in distributed onboarding. This is the stated scope of the program. It is important to emphasize a few of those things, and we will be digging into them a little bit. But it's also important to know what it is not. And it is not a hardware-only focused program, which is just incentivizing potential spamming or gaming for the sake of earning block rewards in an incentivized blockchain system. It is also explicitly trying not to be a closed-loop civil system. And so we do what we can to prevent those kinds of outcomes, and we're looking forward to working with the community to make it even more robust and minimize potential fraudulent or abuse-oriented use cases that are taking place against the network and the resources that the network shares. How do we define clients? A client is any data owner or preparer, anyone that's really serving as the demand-side representative on the Filecoin network, ideally can prove some form of KYC and or KYB. If you're not familiar with those terms, that's know your client or know your business information. These are mechanisms like showing your ID card or proving that you work for a viable business in the network to earn social trust, so that you establish yourself as an entity that somebody can say, hey, yeah, I know who this person is. It's actually a person. It's actually an entity that I can interact with. And if you can't do that, then you have some mechanism to prove long-term network alignment. And so that's to say, hey, you don't want to talk about who you are. You don't want to share that information about yourself. But there should be some way for the rest of us to say, okay, this person is here for the right reasons, with a legitimate use case, with something we want to support and we want to trust. In a completely trustless environment that is a cryptographic blockchain that also has a cryptographic incentive, the easiest way to do this could be providing some sort of collateral or proving that you have a vested interest in the success of the network. There are other more complex ways of doing this. We're interested in exploring more. Quality data was another piece that I'd emphasized when I was explaining the scope of the program. This has been a bit of a hot topic for those of you that have been following the conversation since March of this year. But this is really important because we use this opportunity as an entire community to set the scope for what we care about, what we want to deliver on. Quality data, as it stands today, is defined as the following. And you can check this out anytime you want at the website fileplus.storage. It's also always open for debate and open for feedback. But as it stands right now, it's all content that meets local regulatory requirements and then the following is a set where either the data owner wants this data to be on the network, so this could include private or encrypted data, or this data is a piece of open data that is retrievable and accessible to the rest of the world, thereby serving as in some capacity, a public good, or whatever this data owner is doing demonstrates some sort of utility or proof of concept to the Filecoin network. So it might be testing data to generate black and white pictures of cats because you found a bunch of them in your travels around Iceland. It may not be the most useful thing. Nobody's to say. Theoretically, it's up to your opinion whether or not it is. And so the way we define this is trying to be as objective as possible, which is, hey, you either want this to be on there, which is awesome, it's great, it fits into that bucket, or you're testing something out, you're trying to do some Gen AI use cases on the Filecoin network, and that's awesome. The other thing that we called out right at the top here, right, was distributed onboarding. And this is also really important to understand. We generally currently define this as data that is stored in multiple physical locations and across multiple storage provider entities in an effort to serve the client requirements. So client requirements are inferred as like, hey, you want your data stored via the Filecoin network in a way that makes sense for you. Typically, that means you don't want your data to be lost. You want it to be stored in a place where it's accessible and you can actually get to it. It's stored with entities that either you already trust implicitly or explicitly, or can trust over a period of time based on the fact that you're using a trustless blockchain that does that on your behalf to some extent. And so what we're trying to do here is sort of establish and imply a best practice, but also ensure that we are ensuring that the demand that's coming to the network is set up for success. And so, again, always open for feedback and reinterpretation. But it's worth calling out that this is a definition we've been operating on explicitly for over a period of 6 months at this point. Feedback has been generally positive. The community has rallied around this, and there's alignment there, but we'd love to continue to evolve it. Before I hop into this, I'm going to take this opportunity to reappear as a much better looking person in a jacket, and so I'm just going to duck out for a second.
Smooth transitions all around. That's our MO. I want to also pause. There's bright lights and I can't necessarily see. If you have questions at points of this, feedback, comments, things that you disagree with that we're going over, there are mics. Jump in and let us know. This is a collaborative session, believe it or not. So we talked a lot about the scope. If that is the things that are within scope, all data, clients or onboarders, distributed deal making, then the question becomes, how do we perform this diligence? So right now, the main mechanism is we use this term of a notary that was laid out in the FIP. We may want to change that term, we may keep using that term, we may modify it, but let's use that word for right now. The notary's job is to answer the question, is this within the scope of the program? Is this a real client or data preparer? Do they have real data? Are they ready and willing to engage in distributed deal making? And then sort of the like other framing of that, is this a bad actor? Is this an example of collusion? Is this a Sybil closed loop attack? So the notary has to be able to answer these questions. That is where we put the burden of diligence onto them. From there, we've mentioned this thing of trading some amount of information to gain an amount of power and then scale that power over time. It's like if we want to think about this like mechanism of notaries need to be able to ask these questions, we should try to trust a little bit up front that they may or may not be able to get it perfectly right every time, but that if we can give them a little bit of rope in the form of data cap and then let them either prove us right or wrong, we can then verify some of that information that they gave us qualitatively up front. We've been facing this in the community where there is this pushback on like what is a false positive, what is abuse, how much are we getting it right versus wrong. And there's some school of thought that says you shouldn't give any data cap if it is going to be out of compliance or abused. That's very difficult to do, as you mentioned in this like totally P2P network. We can ask all the qualitative information up front as possible, but until we see some of their deal making on chain, until we have some quantitative metrics, these can still just be gamed and best guesses. So the shift here is not, are the notaries getting it right up front the first time every time? The shift in thinking is, are the notaries continuing to adjust their decision making and intervene based on the evidence? So this is where we want to go from like qualitative claims, giving some amount of power, and then using quantitative verification, and either continuing to give more power or not. That is the intent behind the system. Shifting, we're gonna like dive deeper into these in some of the next talks. This is kind of like a broad strokes. I want to talk about how the program itself goes through changes. So we talked way back here, so long ago. The principal vision and goals are changed through a broad FIP. All of these implementation details of the mechanisms and the operations, those can be iterated and implemented within our repo. And so the question is, well, then how do we do that? If you were here this morning, you heard a lot about how the FIP and the whole Filecoin network attempts to govern and make these changes. How does this program make changes? We also predominantly use this soft consensus mechanism through this notary community. Entities can stand up and apply to be a notary. They will trade some information about who they are to, again, show, do they have long-term network alignment? Where are they located? What is their stake in this network? How are they going to vet and perform diligence? They then become a trusted actor in this community as a notary. To a certain extent, they have some amount of power in then shaping the community. So what we want to do is through our governance repo, as well as Slack and the governance calls, and the Medium blog is really just where we kind of broadcast information, but we want to drive discussions. So anyone could open a GitHub discussion to start talking about an issue or a potential change. That should then come in the form after it's been sort of vetted and formalized into a proposal. And that proposal needs specific implementation details. So a case study example of this, there was a call from the community for us to support encrypted data. It had previously been out of scope for the Filecoin Plus program to support private encrypted data. It was very hard to verify. There was a lot of issues with how do we set precedents on this that don't become instantly gameable by malicious actors. So there was a demand for it. In the form of a discussion, we talked about like, what are the risks? And then a formal proposal was made that said, let's try this specific mechanism. Here are the implementation details. Here are the guardrails. Here is like how long we are going to try this for. From there, the governance team facilitates that conversation. We pitch it in these other forums, we discuss it among the community of notaries, and we seek soft consensus, where some notaries may disagree and say, this proposal has risks, but if there is overwhelming thought of, but it is safe enough to try knowing that we could change it, then we are going to move forward with that iterative change and then monitor the impact and either scale it back or make further changes. And the governance team becomes mostly responsible for doing this project management of that proposal. And so the governance team then takes on that burden of saying, the community wanted a change, maybe it was a new set of dashboards, maybe it was new tooling. Who is going to fund and manage the development of that? How are they going to hold them accountable, et cetera? These are all in the implementation details. And then we, the governance group, kind of take on that lift. So that's like really broad strokes of the program. We're going to hear a lot about risk, some of the meta updates that we're doing around allocators and this change from like notaries and how notaries have been structured into other mechanisms for how data cap may go out, talking about trust and compliance, and then seeing some of the utilization trends of data cap in some of our dashboards. So before I pass it off to an even better looking version of myself, let's see if there are questions on like these main overview topics. Yeah.
Can we go back to the slide that talks about quality? Yes. The first two, the second one is the important one. Mm-hmm. The incentive itself actually fulfills that. Yeah. People store data to get the incentive, and that's the reason why they have the data, want to have the data on the network. So technically all data is willingly brought for the wrong reason, or not for the wrong reason, but for the benefit. So
So yes,
it's
so
a hard
are
decision.
they the data owner? And if they are the data owner and they want their data on the network, then it is in scope. But are they a closed loop Sybil trying to spam and game for a block reward? They would be out of scope. So yes, like if someone is a data owner and they're like, I have security camera footage of a parking lot and I would like that on the network, and here's where I would like to store it, and it is private and encrypted because it's my parking lot. If they are storing it in a distributed way and they are not a closed loop where they are not the person who made it, notarizing it themselves and storing it with themselves, then that would be in scope. If it is private encrypted data that they brought and a notary is able to say, yes, this is a real client, we have confidence that they really do have this set of encrypted security parking lot footage, and they claim it is this scale, that scale seems to match what it should be. We have confidence, we have performed diligence on this person, they're probably going to engage in distributed deal making. We're going to give them a little bit of data cap. Then that data cap and those deals met the compliance tooling of the CIDs were separate. Maybe we need to build better, ways to sample the data. That is very hard to do and has currently been out of scope. How would we sample encrypted data to know if it was parking lot footage, right? But if it is distributed, if they said it was going to be retrievable at a certain metric, and it is, if it's going to different known storage providers that we can ping and say these are in different organizations with different entities, then that would be in scope.
What closes that loop is the SP in the end. Without the SP, you have no loop in this.
Yeah.
And the SPs are not subject of the system.
What do you mean?
They're only mentioned once in the FIP, like in a cornerstone. But the program is not responsible for finding out who SPs are, where they are located and stuff like that. So how do we detect the loop you just mentioned if we don't have authority over the SPs?
Well, we don't have authority over the clients either. The authority comes in the form of, do we continue to give...
Well, the FIP allows you to ask them questions and then say, fuck off.
Right.
cannot do that with SPs.
The FIP can
That's
allow
out
us
of
to
the
ask
scope.
questions of the SPs if we want. We can ask the SPs to give us information about who they are. We could have.
But they are a passive subject in
Just-
your progress.
Just to be clear, I don't actually think there's a process that formally requires SPs to say anything. We actually ask the clients to present information on behalf of the SPs that they choose to work with. Because, like you said, that's the point of leverage that we have in the system.
But what is the point if we cannot make SPs get the information we need to close the loop we are trying to avoid?
But we know whether or not the SPs are different entities and if they are in different locations.
How?
Through pinging.
Yeah,
Because-
I mean, it's best effort. We learn over time. We have to
Yeah.
improve the way we get to it, of course. What else are you going to do? Till such time that we believe that a good proxy for useful work is distributed data onboarding, we have to make the best effort that we can to check whether or not there's a way to prove compliance with that.
But shouldn't we look at this from another angle than what we are doing right now? Shouldn't we look at this from an angle where we know historically, it's not the first week we're running Filecoin Plus, that most of the entities who are involved in this ecosystem are trying to game the system for financial gain, which is what everybody wants, more financing than yesterday, more funds. So we are talking about clients, data preparers, we know that most of these entities are the SPs themselves. There is no separation between the three levels. It's the same entity.
So you're saying, shouldn't we design a system assuming that everyone's a bad actor?
Yes, because we can clearly see with the data that that is the case.
I think that is what we're trying to do.
I know.
Right.
Yeah, so what's the...
So,
Well-
so then the question is like, what are the metrics that we can use? What are the objective toolings that we can use to say, is this distributed deal making?
Well,
is it going to different locations?
The problem is, and that's a serious problem. The first problem is, if we centralize stuff more, we can manage stuff more, which is what we don't want, but that would be a solution. And the second thing is, automation, what you are now trying to develop. But it takes a long time, and the network took an insane hit during this period of rampant use. So that's where we are right now.
Cool. And?
Right.
Well,
so
we
want
need
more
to fix
automation, and the centralization creates risk. So if we try to centralize and force these changes, then we lose the community because now we've become centralized and an autocracy that's saying like, this is our, here's our mandate. So we have to do these things through this change mechanism of making these proposals. So a proposal around how do we check data distribution? What tooling do we need? VPNs are real. Should that be the only metric? I don't think that a VPN should be the only metric to say this is a bad actor if they are using a VPN. What are ways that we can say a VPN can inform a decision, but here are other things that we can build by looking at using other bots to ping latency to try and check actual location. How can we build those bots? Those have to come in the form of proposals. Who's going to fund it and build it? Development, launch, implementation, iteration, and then modify it, right? And that is what we have been attempting to do in launching CID bots, in launching retrieval bots, and having more options of those other bots, and then in having bots that force the compliance. So if a client shows up and says, I am going to engage in open data, and they claim that that is the case, and we give them some power, and then they go do deal making that is to only 5 minor IDs, and those minor IDs are all not retrievable through the different retrieval bots, then stop continuing to give data cap.
Yeah, but that
and
doesn't
make that an
happen.
automated process.
That is correct. What you're saying is perfectly correct. That just doesn't happen.
So
It doesn't
Everything,
happen
every
right
single
now.
time we can see things going wrong by the tools you created.
Right.
In January, we had the first CAD bot. Now we have the retrieval bot. These things are amazing on finding out what's going wrong in this space.
Yeah.
The issue is when we find these errors, we align that we show them to the community. There is no enforcement. There are a large group of notaries continuing to sign. They're not being removed or restrained. These apps continue. There's a huge amount of data cap on these applications where we can see, hey, this is clearly wrong, no enforcement.
So
they can continue.
I'd love to follow up on this. I think that in general, there's a very delicate balance, as you're pointing out, right? Like we can't go towards clear centralization because that poses different types of risks. You have a entity that has runaway power inside of a system that is an open decentralized system that poses a different set of challenges that may be worse or better, depends on the time, hard to say. And on the other side, you've got a set of stakeholders that all have their own interests first, right? So everybody's most interested in doing the thing that is best for them, which largely for an SP who is motivated by the fact that they're operating an SP business is to do the thing that is profit maximizing. And that's also completely reasonable and rational in an economic system. I think what we've seen emerge over the last year is that as people have figured out how to play this game in certain ways or play it better, alongside that, there's also been a set of people that are interested in improving the way in which we can track that. And so I guess shout out the Decent team, for example, who's been doing a bunch of work in tracking this stuff. And there's other teams as well that are involved, several of whom are in the room. The challenge that you have is when you have one voice that comes in with a very strong opinion on interpretation of like what this thing stands for, but the rest of the community doesn't fall into this. It's very difficult to enforce because we are indexing heavily on soft consensus and trying to drive community alignment first. If there was the ability to just say, yep, we're all just going to take a dependency on this one tool, and this one tool says you're bad, you must be bad, that would be really difficult. This is not different from challenges we're seeing today with things like data, just like, for example, AI models. Hot topic right now is like ethics and biases that exist between taking a complete dependency on automation because even the person that wrote the code or the way in which certain assumptions were made tend to drive decisions down the line that result in self-perpetuating cycles that aren't necessarily good for the entire system. And so this is a difficult problem to solve. The hope is that we get to being able to solve it effectively. I would argue that our system today is not designed for efficiency. It is instead designed to index more highly around alignment. And so the word effectiveness is a combination sometimes of both the efficiency, but also the efficacy of the actions. And so we've been, I think, indexed in a way where we're driving efficacy through alignment. And that has resulted in decisions being taken, personally for me, longer than I think they should be for some of the enforcement on this. And so I am interested in finding ways in which we can rebalance a little bit to get to a point where we can more effectively take action based on the output that we have today. I think we're getting much closer to this. I think that the talks today will present opinions that I think are much stronger and we'll still get buy-in than we have been able to in the past just because of what we've observed in the last 6 months. And so I would say hold out for the next 1 hour and then let's dig into how we can leverage some of the things that we're doing to double down on some of this stuff. Going back to Patrick's original point, you're right. An SP is a core part of this. However, the point of leverage that we have is really with the notaries.
But is there an explicit reason? Maybe the reason happened before the FIP was written.
Yeah.
Why SPs are not included in this? The SPs are the benefactors of the.
So I think the reason they're not included in this is because when this FIP was designed, it was designed around empowering the client. And the biggest assumption was that a client makes decisions around deal proposals. I think what we're observing in the network today is that leverage changes hands quite a bit, both to the supply side and the demand side. And it depends on many things. It depends on information asymmetry. It depends on market conditions, the token value, the block reward value, a lot of things, right? A lot of factors that are outside the scope of this FIP. And so, yeah, I think power has changed around quite a bit. Leverage gets thrown around and adjusted quite a bit based on these factors that are external to the design of this program. And so the original point of leverage that we had was notaries to clients. We expect clients to make decisions. So then if they make bad decisions, we can hold them accountable for that once we decided to trust them. And even if we were to include SPs in this system, I still think our point of leverage would be the clients because ultimately it is in today's world without like some of the FIPs that we've been talking about at this summit, being implemented, which the nearest term for that is like February of next year, it still would be the case that we're in today. I don't think it would like specifically change our ability to do much here.
All the tooling is based on the SP.
No, all the tooling is based on where the deals were made. The deals were initiated by a client.
Yes, but you test the SP, don't you?
Of course, you need the SP to have a deal. I don't understand what do you think we are?
You are introducing a delay into detection, enforcement, and then it's too late.
Okay.
The fraud, you don't we have, if we, for example, include SPs into in the KYC scope of Plus, wouldn't we have a way earlier point to make sure instead of going after the fact?
So,
I mean, it's easy to Sybil if we have that delay in enforcement.
so there's a combination here. It is potentially easy to Sybil, but also we would just be introducing like more operational overhead on the front end that could still just be Sybil attacked in like in a very similar set of mechanisms where someone would just stand up a subsidiary or stand up other minor IDs, or like a person trying to game the system who is acting as an SP. If we are attempting to just add more qualitative checks before trusting an SP, we are just adding more room for that person to give us like false information. Whereas if we add quantitative verification, we are using the data cap and the client as the leverage point so that the client needs to be holding their SPs accountable. And in this instance, if the client is the SP, then they are holding themselves accountable as well. So if a client shows up and claims my data is going to go to these 8 minor IDs and I'm ready to do deal making with them, etc., if we then trust that client and that client is that storage provider, then they are the ones who are going to make sure that those deals go to the places they claimed they were going to go. And that is quantitative verification then downstream, where we can say the client is the place where we have leverage to make sure that they are doing the deal making they claimed to want to do. Julian?
Yes, so I may take some time to explain everything I want to say.
Sorry?
I said that may take some time for me to explain everything I want to say. First thing, I have a very different opinion of what you just said. Like, I think that if you look at the network, a client is not supposed to work with just a subset of SPs, but should onboard on as many SPs as he's supposed to do. So if you look at the way today we apply, I apply very, like last week for a data cap. I went through all the process, and like the process is enforcing me to list the SPs I'm going to work with. As a client, if I'm not a storage provider, but I'm a pure client, I'm not supposed to know this list of SPs. Like, I can use tooling just to onboard data to the network. I don't have to say, oh, this is the SP, that number of SP.
Right.
Why I
Yeah,
should
no,
do
that's
that?
a great
So even
point.
that, just this for me is really important to keep in mind that I don't see how we can scale with this. We are supposed to have hundreds of, or thousands of nodes on the network that is supposed to accept deals. This network should be like a community of storage providers working together. For me, the way it's working right now is just made to avoid scamming, but it's the way it's designed. This can just work for scamming. That's my own opinion. And then what I want to say.
Yeah.
Okay, so just for people, I think in this room and as a notary, I'm the oldest notary. I was here from the first round of the notaries. So I have seen all this coming from the beginning. We have this type of discussion when Jonathan Victor started this program. So what I'm seeing right now is just increasing exponentially. And what's happening is like we have a lot of tooling. We spend a lot of effort just to validate, and we make these things more and more complex, so less and less scalable. And I think we all agree on that. What I want to say is today, when someone tries to cheat the system, what does it cost to him? Nothing. You cheat the system. Everything you get until someone catch you, you keep it. And for me, that's a big problem. If cheating the system or taking the risk to cheat the system costs you more than what you can get, you will less and less try to cheat the system. And this is what we're missing today. The only thing that we're doing today is like, you cheat. Oh, okay, we remove your data cap. This is a pseudonymous network, right? Anybody can create an account right after and do it again.
Yep.
So that doesn't work. So the only way to do that is like, for me, and I have this proposition since day one, we need to find some ways through this network to remove the data cap that has been allocated to the sectors that are on the network without changing the collateral. You stack 10x, we remove that benefits from you, and it costs you 10x for 18 months. And that's the cost. And I'm pretty sure that nobody would take the risk of that.
Yeah. I'm going to start to jump in. Did you say the things you want to say or were there?
Let me
You asked me to give
see.
you time, so I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah, I think it's good.
Okay.
Julian,
Yeah.
what we will see, Julian, is me actively working towards taking away data cap
Yeah.
as an SP. As
Can I
it's
jump in?
then incentivized to damage the others or
So-
bring them down.
One of the first things you mentioned is like, if you're a real client, you may not know the SPs you're going to work with. You may just want to use an onboarding tool. The question really is like, are you ready and willing to do distributed deal making? And if your answer is, yes, this is the tool that I'm going to use, and that tool is solving the distribution problem, that would be great. Like right now, it is just we are using these like proxy questions to then have a quantifiable way of checking compliance. So if you were to say, yes, I'm going to use a tool like this to do my deal making, and then we could quantifiably confirm that that was the tool you used, that still meets this expectation of like, are you ready and willing to do this if you're a real client? Your other question, like your other point about the consequences, I think that there are a couple of ways to solve this. I think one of them is changing the like verification power post facto. I think that is a mechanism. I think there's a lot of complicated like it becomes that is a FIP, right? Like that is a more complicated FIP. That doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. That is a way to do it. An other way to do it that is through social reputation is a way that we are also trying to explore and experiment. So if a client shows up and makes a claim and they are given some amount of power and they are then notarized by a certain entity notary, let's say it's you. You have now put your stamp on them. You have staked some of your social reputation on them. If they then go do deals with certain minor IDs, and then we find out afterwards that through other mechanisms, they claimed they were going to behave in this way. They didn't. They claimed it would be retrievable. It wasn't. If there was a reputation scoring that said those minor IDs all take a ding, and that notary, if the notary was found to have not performed sufficient diligence, that notary takes a ding. Now, when a new client shows up, are they going to want to work with a notary that has a lower reputation or one with a high one? Can we use more of these like social systems that don't require a FIP to also create consequences, right? For the notaries who are trying to do business development as notaries or building a system where they are staking their reputation and their brand on this, like those notaries have a vested interest in having a high reputation score because that's what's going to drive like more business to them. And same with storage providers. If storage providers are going to stand up and say, I am in this system, these are my minor IDs, I've worked through Phil Green, I have like proved this information, I've done KYB, here's where I'm posting that publicly, come work with me. And they take deals and those deals remain high value deals. There are not disputes against them. Their reputation score could be high, right? And then when a new client shows up, they're going to want to work with high reputable SPs. This is a mechanism where we can then ding, similar to like credit scoring, the actors in this space to create some kind of like downstream cost in their business model that doesn't require FIP. I'm not saying we shouldn't do the FIP. I'm just saying like there are ways that we want to try both.
Galen,
Yeah.
is everyone aware that at the moment we are spending over half of the block rewards to these miners and to these entities who take verified deals? Because if we actually look at the data, we can fairly easily say how much data there is stored through Filecoin Plus. But we can also say, and you made the tooling for this, that a huge amount of this the data, I just saw almost 90% is not really retrievable or indexable, usable. We also know that out of these 2,500 LDN applications, only a few handful of real clients emerged, because most of the clients are the SPs themselves to make the financial gain. We ended up now spending more than half of the Filecoin block rewards towards entities who are mostly there storing garbage data to earn more block rewards. This shouldn't be the incentive. So things went wrong last summer, a year ago, and every day we wait, this gets worse. So my main question is, how fast can we now go to a space where indeed what Julian said, these scammers are not being rewarded more than the cost. This is
You wanna take this?
extremely important.
I think you're bringing up great points, and I think that still goes back to this issue of like, how do we make faster changes when this is the process, and how do we get people to align on some of these? What we've been seeing in the past handful of months is that all of our effort has been fighting about these, and we haven't had any time to implement changes to the things that you're talking about, because we are doing all this work debating the scope.
Yeah.
So
Are
we
we
need to stop debating the scope and then start debating the implementation. If we
Yeah.
care about distributed onboarding, how do we build a tool to check it and
Yeah,
then
but
test it and move on?
Every time there's a super great idea from the governance team of Filecoin Plus into GitHub, you are forgetting that 80% of the entities active are the ones gaming the system. They have no advantage in allowing you
Right.
to improve. So the most responses you get will be negative. So that
Right.
also doesn't work. And yeah, that's just an annoying thing to see.
Oh
every
yeah, I
single
mean it's
day.
super annoying for all of us, right? To like launch what we think is a good iterative idea that we think is going to make change, and to then get like stymied and stonewalled and brigaded by people that want to continue gaming it.
Yeah.
And so that's the question is like, these are some of the talks that are going to come up, and we're like
Yeah.
hitting at time. The pathways that we have to like make these change is through new notary election cycles. And so the
Yeah.
more that we can do to like align and define what risk and compliance, like what are the different types of notaries that we want, what is the tooling that we need, and then do new election cycles to then say these notaries were not engaged or their footprint was not great. Like, how do we track and audit the past behavior as we go into the next notary election cycle, and then say, great, we had 80, was that successful? Do we need fewer? Do we need more? Do they need different levels of power?
But until we answer all these questions and go into the V5 round with more automation and hopefully much better results than the last 1.5 years, can we at least limit what's happening right now? We know the numbers. We know how. I mean, I'm going through all LDNs every week, twice.
Yeah.
So,
And
like,
most of them. So are we? Well, because we are still growing at an extreme pace, and
Yeah.
most
Yeah,
of it is
onboarding
still
has
unknown.
remained about
The same.
linear
Yeah.
through this year, which is surprising and
Yeah, but
potentially
we
problematic.
need to,
And
we
so
need
then
to decrease the amount of risk, which
Fully
also
on board.
results in decreasing the few proper actors.
Fully on board.
I think that the damage is worth the
Yeah.
cost.
I think there's
Agreed.
also an extreme amount of pressure from other sources to keep onboarding rates growing. And I
Yes.
think this
Lock
becomes a
up
really hard
Filecoin.
problem to solve, where
Yeah.
we were everybody's solution until we were everybody's problem. And so
Exactly.
being in this position of we need to grow the network, we need to increase trust and confidence, but we also have to meet all the demand, but it also has to be super efficient, but it also has to, we're balancing these really complicated things. And so I think your points here are like, let's slow things down so that we can land some foundational changes. And I think that is a thing that our team has been trying to push. And my, like, again, call to action is the part that has been hard is like fighting over principle issues, not implementation issues. And so then if we can land more on what are some of these mechanisms and slow some of the mechanisms down while we build more of the automation and tooling, let's like push through to change. Calling time here because we are. I don't even know. There's not a clock up here. I think we're over. But we're going to keep this conversation. So like hold on to it. I'm going to bring up now Matt from Elementus to talk a little bit about risk. Woohoo!